In the quiet suburb of Fairlawn Ridge, where manicured lawns and matching mailboxes define the landscape, Ray Winston stood as a pillar of pride and resilience. At 78, this retired Marine had weathered life's storms, bearing a wife, raising two sons, and keeping his modest home at the cul-de-sac's edge with an American flag snapping in the breeze. That morning, he was out fixing a loose slat on his gray fence, a simple task he'd done countless times without fuss. But at 11:08 a.m., a white SUV rolled up, its tinted windows hiding the menace inside. Two men emerged clad in black tactical vests with HOA enforcement patches stitched boldly across their chests. They carried no badges, no name tags, just a clipboard and a smug sense of authority that didn't hold up under scrutiny. Claiming Ray's repair violated some obscure rule, they demanded a $400 fine and a signed citation. Ray, his spine forged in the Marine Corps, didn't bend. "You ever serve?" he asked, eyeing their mirrored sunglasses and cargo pants. Their silence was answer enough. When he refused to sign, the larger man grabbed his arm, and in a flash of violence, a sickening crack echoed down the street. Ray's left forearm snapped like a twig, and he crumpled to the concrete, pain searing through him. The fake officers hesitated, then fled, muttering about resistance as their SUV peeled away. Left alone on his lawn, Ray faced not just a broken arm, but the sting of a neighborhood too cowed to help. This wasn't just an assault. It was a stark display of how the HOA, meant to protect, had morphed into a petty tyranny, its imposters wielding power they never earned. In Fairlawn Ridge, where every lawn was clipped to perfection and shutters matched mailboxes like a suburban uniform, the sound of Ray Winston's arm breaking should have shattered the silence. At 78, the retired Marine lay sprawled on his own driveway, clutching a forearm bent at a grotesque angle after two fake HOA officers assaulted him over a fence repair. The crack reverberated down the block, a stark violation of the peace he'd earned after decades of service and loss. Yet as the sun blazed overhead, no one came. Curtains twitched behind spotless windows, shadows shifted as neighbors peeked out, but doors stayed locked tight. This wasn't just indifference, it was fear, a quiet paralysis that had taken root in a community once built on backyard barbecues and friendly waves. The HOA, with its endless fines for unapproved flower beds or a car parked an inch too long, had turned neighbors into strangers, each afraid of being the next target. Ray, a man who'd faced enemy fire without flinching, now faced something worse, the betrayal of a place he'd called home for nearly 20 years. No one dialed 911. No one shouted for help. It was a kind mail carrier, a stranger to the cul-de-sac, who finally found him, still conscious, barely moving, and called an ambulance. At the hospital, X-rays confirmed a compound fracture, but the deeper wound was the realization that Fairlawn Ridge had surrendered its soul to petty rules and intimidation. Behind those beige walls and expensive blinds, people watched but didn't act, their apathy a silent accomplice to the HOA's reign. For Ray, the pain was white-hot, but the stillness of his neighbors burned even more. When Ray Winston's arm snapped under the grip of fake HOA officers, the sound didn't just echo through Fairlawn Ridge. It reached across the city to his grandson, Jack Winston. A mechanic with grease-stained hands and a love for Harleys, Jack was in his garage tinkering with an old bike when his phone buzzed. His mother's voice cracked through sobs. "They broke his arm." That was enough. Jack didn't need details. Family was family, and Ray, the 78-year-old Marine who'd raised him to stand tall, was hurting. Within minutes, he swapped his overalls for a dusty leather vest emblazoned with Brothers of Iron, a weathered emblem of loyalty. He fired off a single text to a group labeled "Emergency Ride Only." "Meet at Fairlawn Ridge. This is personal." By nightfall, the rumble of 10 motorcycles shook the pristine streets, a thunderous promise of retribution. Jack led the pack, his matte black, Harley purring like a predator, followed by his cousins, veterans, bouncers, mechanics, men with tattooed arms and steel-toe boots, not weekend riders, but a brotherhood forged in grit. They rolled through the iron gates, parking diagonally across the cul-de-sac, a wall of leather and steel. Ray, now home from the hospital with his arm in a sling, looked up from his porch recliner and grinned faintly. Didn't think you'd bring the whole damn cavalry, he rasped. Jack knelt beside him, dark hair falling over his eyes. You raised us to handle things right. For these bikers, it wasn't about chaos. It was about justice for Grandpa Ray, a man who'd held the line his whole life. Their arrival wasn't just a show of force. It was a family reclaiming what bullies had tried to take, setting the stage for a reckoning. In Fairland Ridge, a suburb where conformity reigned supreme, lawns trimmed at sunrise, mailboxes painted to match shutters, the arrival of Jack Winston and his biker cousins was like a jolt of lightning on a still summer night. After fake HOA officers broke Ray Winston's arm, the neighborhood had watched in silence, fear keeping doors shut and voices mute. But when 10 Harleys roared into the cul-de-sac, parking in a deliberate blockade, something shifted. At first, the residents peered out from behind expensive blinds, clutching phones, unsure if these leather-clad men were trouble or salvation. Jack, leading the pack, stepped onto Ray's porch, his grandfather's faint smile a quiet endorsement. Didn't think you'd bring the whole damn cavalry. The bikers didn't shout or brandish weapons. They just stood there, a calm, unshakable presence that dared the HOA's petty tyranny to push back. Then came the spark that lit the fire. Mrs. Callahan, a 74-year-old widow from across the street, shuffled out with a tray of lemonade, her voice steady as she asked, "You boys want something cold?" A biker smiled, and that small act cracked the facade of fear. Soon, a man dragged out folding chairs, a kid on a scooter begged for a Harley ride, and whispers turned to conversations. Neighbors, long silenced by fines for too artistic mailboxes or smoke from a backyard grill, began to share their stories with Jack. The HOA's reign of passive aggression, $200 fines for a drying rack, notices for unseasonal porch decor, had turned them into strangers, but now they saw a chance to fight back. The bikers' quiet strength reminded them of what a spine felt like, and suddenly everyone wanted one. Overnight, the tide turned. An elderly man spray-painted over an HOA sign, a young mom tore down a rule sheet from her mailbox, and kids stomped on violation stakes littering lawns. Jack hadn't planned a revolution. He'd come for Ray. But the neighborhood seized the moment. What started as a family's stand became a community's awakening, a rebellion against years of control disguised as order. Fairlawn Ridge wasn't just stirring. It was rising, reclaiming the spirit of connection that bureaucracy had stolen, one lemonade glass and bold step at a time. In Fairlawn Ridge, the illusion of order crafted by the HOA began to crumble when Jack Winston and his biker cousins uncovered the rot at its core. After fake officers broke Ray Winston's arm, Jack's crew didn't just park their Harleys and glare, they dug deeper. Late one night, a cousin intercepted a van creeping into the neighborhood at 3 a.m., its driver armed with a laptop, printer, and stacks of blank HOA violation slips. Pre-signed, ready to be filled with any name or address. The man confessed on camera. He was paid per fine, following orders from Arthur Simmons, the HOA president who ruled from the shadows. Jack held on to this bombshell, a USB of footage and recording that included the assault on Ray, captured by a neighbor's shaky hand. The next day, Simmons rolled in, a slick figure in a charcoal suit and red tie, flanked by private security, oozing the confidence of a man untouchable by suburban complaints. He taped a notice in bold red ink to the HOA clubhouse door, ordering all unauthorized demonstrations to cease, only to watch Jack tear it down and drop it at his feet. "This isn't a negotiation," Jack said, his voice cold, revealing the evidence. Video of Ray's assault, the fake fines, the whole corrupt scheme. Simmons smirked, dismissing the washed-up bikers, until Jack held up the USB. "This goes to every homeowner, every news station, and the state attorney general unless you resign and dissolve the HOA. Today." The neighbors, once timid, now stood tall, phones recording, one holding a sign. "Ray deserves better." Simmons' face drained of color as fear replaced his swagger. That night he vanished, slipping into his black Lexus without a word, abandoning his enforcers, Derek and Carl, who'd holed up in the clubhouse hoping for rescue. But Jack had tipped off the sheriff and real deputies met them at the back door, zip-tying them on a squad car hood as residents cheered. The HOA board resigned en masse, the clubhouse was sealed, and 2 years of violations were voided. Corruption collapsed under the weight of truth, and Fairlawn Ridge breathed free. Justice delivered not by fists, but by evidence and resolve. In the wake of the HOA's collapse, Fairlawn Ridge transformed from a battlefield of fear into a beacon of justice and togetherness. A victory sealed not with violence, but with the quiet strength of a united community. 2 days after the arrests of Derek and Carl, the fake officers who'd broken Ray Winston's arm, the neighborhood shed its shackles. The HOA clubhouse sat empty, its windows boarded, its flagpoles stripped of the white and blue emblem that once symbolized control. Ray, the 78-year-old Marine whose injury sparked it all, rested on his porch beneath an oak, his arm in a sling but his spirit unbroken. Across the street, Jack Winston leaned against his Harley, sipping coffee from a steel mug, watching a scene he'd never imagined. Kids scribbling chalk art on driveways, free from unsanctioned activity fines, and neighbors setting up lawn chairs for real conversations, not just polite nods. Mrs. Douglas, once a stickler for every stray leaf, smiled as she passed with her poodle, a small but seismic shift. That afternoon, the community threw a block party, an impromptu celebration of liberation. Tables lined the sidewalks with hot dogs, lemonade, and cookies, music drifting from open windows, unburdened by rules about seasonal decor. Ray and Jack arrived together, Ray in a folding chair, Jack in his cut-off vest, greeted like heroes. A little girl handed Ray a crayon drawing of him standing tall, saying shyly, "My dad said you're a real fighter." "I just held the line, sweetheart," he replied, his smile soft but proud. Later, Jack took a microphone in the cul-de-sac, his voice steady. This place was run by fear. Fines, letters, control disguised as order. You took it back. Now protect it by being neighbors again. The crowd murmured agreement, Ray's chest swelling with pride. Lawsuits loomed and old habits lingered, but the foundation had shifted. Fairlawn Ridge wasn't perfect. It was better. A place reborn through leather-clad resolve and the courage of ordinary folks. For Ray, Jack, and every resident, this triumph wasn't just justice. It was home, reclaimed one handshake, one shared laugh at a time. For Ray Winston, the battle in Fairlawn Ridge wasn't just about a broken arm. It was a chance to reclaim a piece of himself he'd feared lost. At 78, this retired Marine had faced wars overseas and personal losses at home, bearing his wife and raising sons who'd since moved away. His twilight years were meant for peace, sipping coffee on his porch beneath the American flag he'd earned the right to fly. But when fake HOA officers snapped his forearm over a fence slat, leaving him crumpled on the concrete, Ray felt a rare powerlessness, not from the pain, but from the creeping tyranny of rules that had silenced his neighborhood. Then came Jack, his grandson, roaring in with biker cousins to right the wrong. As the HOA crumbled and Fairlawn Ridge awoke, Ray sat under his oak, arm in a sling, watching kids play and neighbors laugh at a block party, scenes he'd never thought he'd see again. When a little girl handed him a drawing, calling him a fighter, he smiled. "I just held the line, sweetheart," but pride flickered in his eyes. Later, as dust settled, he turned to Jack, leaning against his Harley. "You were always the wild one," Ray said, voice steady. "I worried where it'd take you." Jack smirked. "To a suburban revolution, apparently." Ray's chuckle gave way to something deeper. "I'm proud of you. Not for fighting, but for knowing when it was worth it." For Ray, this wasn't just justice. It was redemption, a legacy reaffirmed through Jack's resolve. The ache in his arm lingered, but the heavier burden lifted. In a world where battles often felt rigged, this time the right side won, and Ray's quiet strength endured, etched into a freer Fairlawn Ridge. The story of Ray Winston and Fairlawn Ridge offers timeless lessons for those of us in our later years. First, it reminds us that standing firm in our values, as Ray did, isn't diminished by age. It's strengthened by experience. When petty tyrants tried to break him, his resolve sparked a movement, proving that one voice can still echo through a silent crowd. Second, it teaches the power of family and community. Jack and his biker cousins didn't just fight for Ray, they rekindled a neighborhood spirit, showing that loyalty and togetherness can heal what fear tears apart. For seniors, this is a call to lean on loved ones and neighbors, not out of weakness, but to build something stronger. Finally, it's about legacy. Ray's pride in Jack wasn't in the battle itself, but in knowing when it mattered. In our own lives, we can apply this by choosing our fights wisely, speaking up against injustice, and nurturing the bonds that outlast us. Age doesn't fade our influence. It refines it. Like Ray, we can hold the line, quietly inspiring others to rise, ensuring our years leave a mark of courage and connection.